Submarines are quite rare, and there are currently only a few hundred active around the world, which is why you don't see them very often. Even though underwater adventures are quite interesting, as is the life of a submarine after work, and that's why we take a look at some abandoned submarines today. Like the Questor 1. Here we have a very special model because this boat is a unique piece that was finished in 1967 after 3 years of work by Jerry Bianco. With the help of this 14-meter-long submarine, he wanted to recover the wreck of a ship called Andrea Doria, which sank off the coast of Nantucket and whose scrap value was around $6 million. For this purpose, air-filled balloons should be brought down into the wreck to lift it. According to tests, his self-made submarine would have been able to dive to a depth of 180 meters, but unfortunately it never got to that point because it was incorrectly brought into the water at the beginning and then capsized. Since then, the boat has been laying in the Bay of Coney Island, rusting away and being visited by adventurers every now and then. 2 of the 20 built submarines of the X-class are currently located in the Aberlady Bay and can be viewed at low tide. At 15.6 meters, these Royal Navy boats were only slightly larger than the homemade Questor 1, but they were still very effective. Their main goal was the largest battleship ever built in Europe, the German Tirpitz. By placing sea mines under the ship, these tiny submarines managed to severely damage the Tirpitz. 2 X-class boats were brought to the beach at Aberlady in 1946, attached to a concrete block, and finally used for target practice by the Royal Air Force. A somewhat sad ending for a couple of small but impressive midget submarines. The U-352 belonged to Type 7 and was used by the German Navy during the Second World War. However, she was unable to sink enemy ships and was sunk by the American Coast Guard in 1942, 1 year after she entered service. In 1975, the wreck was finally rediscovered off the coast of North Carolina. Since then, the wreck has been frequented by divers and is therefore considered the main underwater attraction of the area. The UB-122 is a few years older because she was used by the Imperial German Navy. However, her missions were also unsuccessful, and after the end of the First World War, she was finally supposed to be handed over to Great Britain. The submarine was probably sinking due to a storm while being towed to her destination. That's why you can see the wreck today on a sandbar on the Medway River near the English coast. Now the UB-122 is the only externally completely preserved submarine from the First World War that is in English waters. The USS Ling is a Balao-class submarine which was in service for the United States Navy. After that, she was part of the Atlantic Reserve Fleet for 14 years and was finally converted into a training ship in 1960, where all aspects of submarine operation could be simulated. In 1972, after the submarine was removed from the Marine Register, many people went to great lengths to save the USS Ling from being scrapped. Their efforts were successful, and the submarine was completely restored and opened to the public as a museum ship. But that wasn't exactly cheap because the New Jersey Naval Museum had to pay a whole $1 per year as rent. The future of the USS Ling is currently unclear, since the museum was closed and the submarine was repeatedly filled with water due to damage, which could possibly prevent her from being transported away. Here we have the remains of the world's first fully functional submarine built by Julius Kroll in 1865. The submarine explorer could reach depths of 40 meters, and unlike previous inventions, she could emerge on her own. It's hard to believe, but this 12-meter-long and 30-ton submarine was actually powered by muscle strength. But because the diving disease was not known at the time, unfortunately, all crew members and the inventor died after a few successive pearl diving missions. Therefore, the boat was abandoned and left on the beach of the island of San Telmo in the Gulf of Panama, where the remains are still lying around till this day. Unlike all the old rusty submarines in this video, the INS Cursura still looks like she's new, even though she was in the Indian Navy for 31 years. At that time, this 91-meter-long ship was still powered by 6 engines that had a total of almost 12,000 horsepower. After various missions in the Indian-Pakistani War and 136,000 traveled kilometers, the Cursura is now retired and can be visited in Vishakhapatnam. The K-159 belongs to Project 627, codenamed Whale, also known as the November class, and was first used by the Soviet and later by the Russian Navy. 26 years after the launch, the submarine was finally decommissioned and, with no further measures, simply anchored to a marine base without removing the radioactive material on board. They didn't even remove the 800 kilograms of nuclear fuel, although the boat was not in good condition. It was only kept afloat by 4 large tanks that were moored to the hull. It was not until 14 years later that the Navy finally received the money for the environmentally friendly disposal of the submarine, but problems occurred when towing it. Water entered, and the K-159 sank together with the 7-man crew in the 238-meter deep water. The K-77 from the Juliet class also led an interesting life after the active service. A Finnish businessman bought the Russian submarine after it was decommissioned, brought it to Helsinki, and turned it into a restaurant. The business did not go as well as hoped, so he sold the boat to an investor from Canada, who went bankrupt after a short time. Thereupon, the submarine should be sold on eBay for a starting price of $1 million, but this did not work because there were no interested parties. The K-77 was then rented to the producers of the film K-19, The Widowmaker, for $200,000 to shoot a few scenes there. In 2002, a buyer was finally found who wanted to turn the old submarine into a museum ship. It went well for a while until it sank in 2007 after water entered the bow torpedo room. 15 months later, U.S. Navy divers were able to bring the boat to the surface with compressed air, but the cost of a restoration would have been too high. The K-77 really did have a pretty impressive life story. In 1921, the German mine-laying submarine SMU-118 washed up on the beach in Hastings, England. It was probably intentionally destroyed in an insurance fraud and then accidentally washed ashore in front of the Queen's Hotel. For a while, the old vessel even served as a tourist attraction, and you could enter the inside of the submarine for a small fee. Later, however, the boat was blown up and the individual parts removed. The U-475 Black Widow was formerly part of the Russian Navy and was known there as the B-49. It is a Foxtrot-class boat that was used to train Cuban, Indian, and Libyan soldiers. In 1994, the B-49 was decommissioned and sold to an English businessman for $100,000. The new private owner renamed it U-475 Black Widow and made it accessible to the public as a museum ship. Over the next few years, the submarine was relocated twice and eventually ended up in the river near Rochester. Here, the obviously broken Black Widow is sadly rusting away. The HMAS Otama was an Oberon-class boat and had been in service for the Royal Australian Navy for over 20 years. Then it was sold to an association that wanted to make a museum out of the submarine, which never happened due to lack of permits. That's why the Otama was put up for auction on eBay. There was an interested party who supposedly wanted to use the submarine for travel events, but the association suspected that it would instead be used for drug smuggling, which is why they didn't sell it. Instead, the Otama played a small role in a Russian short film called Deeper Than Yesterday, which even won a few awards. Today you can see the Otama off the coast of Hastings in Australia, where it was moored and remains abandoned until further notice. The B-80 belongs to the Zulu class and was made by the Soviet Navy. After her active service, she was handed over to a private buyer from the Netherlands in 1991. In the years that followed, the submarine kept changing hands, but no one was able to really implement their plans, so it simply kept on being sold. At some point, you couldn't even say with certainty who exactly owned the ship, and so in 2019, it was brought to a junkyard and taken apart. Japan invented the midget submarine Class A for the attack on American territory in the Second World War. They were about 24 meters long and weighed only 46 tons. Many of these submarines were blown up by their own crew so as to not fall into the hands of the enemy. One example is still on Kiska Island and can be visited by tourists. In 1917, the German submarine SMUC-61 ran aground off the coast of France and was left behind there. Over the next 20 years, it sank completely into the muddy ground. It only reappeared recently because the masses of sand had moved. During low tide, you can now admire the rusted remains of the old submarine. The K-84 belonged to the Delta class and was once one of the most powerful nuclear submarines of the Soviet Navy. On board were 16 ballistic missiles, each with 4 atomic warheads. In 2011, the K-84 was on a dry dock in Murmansk for repair work. On December 29, a fire broke out on the dry dock. Fortunately, the nuclear weapons were unloaded beforehand, otherwise, the worst catastrophe since Chernobyl could have occurred. When trying to extinguish the fire, the submarine was deliberately sunk in the water. This, and of course the fire, caused damage of 1 billion rubles to the submarine, which is about $12 million. So, those were a few of the abandoned submarines around the world and their stories. I hope you enjoyed the video. Take care, and see you next time. Bye!